day everyone. We are the last presenter and we are going to report the organizational change and development. And I am Rachel E. Doliente. I am with Francisco, Elisimi Salire, and Jane Miranda. So for the table of contents, first we have is the differences of OD and OC, or the organizational development and the organizational change. Second, we have the factors driving organizational change. Third, we have the 12 different types of large-scale organizational design. And lastly, the different types of organizational interventions used to enhance organizational effectiveness, employees' well-being, and productivity. So now let's define first what is organizational development. So according to Porras and Robertson 1992, organizational development is a set of behavioral science-based theories, values, strategies, and technologies aimed at the planned change of the organizational work setting for the purpose of enhancing individual development and improving organizational performance through the alteration of organizational members' on-the-job behaviors. Organizational development also understands how things are working, how they are meeting their missions, and how the work is done. Also, in other words, it is a planned effort taken to increase the organization's effectiveness. So let's now define what is organizational change. So organizational change can be defined as a changes caused by environmental shift that, once sensed by the organization, leads to an intentionally generated response. This is according to Porras and Silver 1999. Organizational change is a simple cause and effect scenario where a cause of some sort, either internal or external, ultimately creates an effect of the organization needing to change. Organizational change is an extremely complex dynamic of time, processes, and context that are incorporated into an organization. It is according to Cameron, Pettigrew, and Woodman 2001. So let's now identify what is the difference between OD and OC. So the focus of organizational development is facilitating organizational performance and individual development, while the focus of organizational change is exclusively on the enhancing either organizational performance or individual development. So in other words, yung organizational development is parehas nakafocus sa organizational performance as well as sa individual development. So parehas nilang binibigyan importance yung dalawang yon. While in organizational change, isa lang yung finofocus nila. It's either enhancing the organizational performance or individual development. So if nag-focus sila sa individual development and hindi nila sinama yung organizational performance, that is only qualified as organizational change. So another difference is that organizational development is rooted in the theories and methodology of the behavioral science, while the organizational change is based solely on changes in manufacturing technology or perhaps information systems. Also, organizational development is a planned effort taken to increase the organization's effectiveness and implement the organizational change. While the organizational change includes changing organization's structure, technology, and processes, and business model to gain competitive advantage. Also, change is related to the response of outside environments, while development pertains to the values, strategies, and techniques that organizations use to manage change. Okay, so bibigyan ko kayo ngayon ng example ng organizational change and organizational development. So, ang scenario natin dito is merong isang coffee shop na malapit sa simbahan. And then December tong season na to, and we all know naman na kapag December may simbang gabi. So, yung owner naisip niya na to change the number of her employees kasi naisip niya rin na dudumugin sila ng customers since malapit nga sila sa simbahan and simbang gabi pa. And we also know how in-demand coffees are right now, diba? So, naisip niya na dagdagan yung numbers ng employees at mag-hire ng part-timers for that specific time period. So, that's the organizational change. Yung owner, naisip niya na baguhin yung numbers ng employees para magkaroon ng enough balance between the customers and the employees. Para ma-accommodate ng mga employees niya lahat ng mga customers na pupunta sa shops niya. So that's how organizational change works. So for organizational development, this is still related about what I tell you kanina sa organizational change. So after ng simbang gabi, na-realize ng owner na hindi pa rin enough yung people na hinire niya para mag-accommodate sa dami ng customers kapag simbang gabi. For her, hindi nag-work ng maayos, hindi naging efficient sa organization yung pagdadagdag ng tauhan, kaya naisip niya at pinagplanuhan niya na bumili ng machine na makakatulong sa kanila for sa susunod na simbang gabi. If you guys are familiar with the kiosk machine, yung nakikita sa McDonald's, yung stand na kulay itim, tapos pinipindot yun. Yun yung kiosk machine, wherein people can easily access it and order from there. So, hindi na kailangan ng maraming tao. Since if meron ka nun, mas mapapabilis yung transaction ng order. And that is the organizational development. The owner decided to buy and develop a new machine for the improvement of the organization. Also, that kiosk machine can not only be used during simbang gabi, like nandun na siya mismo sa coffee shop. So if they will invest on something like that, it's a long-term period na mapapakinabangan ng organization. So let's now proceed to the aim of development and change. So organizational development focuses on one specific area of change and facilitates it, while organizational change focuses on moving from current status to a planned better future status. So the focus subject of organizational development is on developing and enhancing employees' skills, knowledge, development, and behaviors for long-term performance, while the organizational change mainly focuses on change schedule, time, quality, and the cost. So the duration of organizational development is a long-term effort, while the organizational change has a specific time schedule that is shorter period compared to organizational development. So the basis of the plan of organizational development is planned based on the real problem of the organization, while the organizational change is planned on a forecasted situation. So here's another example of organizational development. So there's this university na napansin nila na yung regular age range ng mga college students nila ay tumataas. Diba sa generation natin ngayon, ang normal age range for a college student is 19 to 20 to 23 or 24 years old. But then, they noticed na mayroon na silang mga students or marami na silang students na above 25 years old or meron pang 30 and above or almost 40 years old na. So they realized na maraming nang nag-aaral even they are working or even they have a family na. So they conducted a plan wherein they will offer online classes as well as weekend classes. so that they can afford to study even if they are busy. Like, if online class, they could manage their time, or if pag may weekend classes, they can go study after working. So that is organizational development. They developed a plan, or they developed something to improve or give effectiveness for the organization.
Hi everyone, I'm Elisa Salire, and today I'm going to discuss about the factors driving organizational change. But before that, let's define first what is an organizational change. So, an organizational change, it is actually the process of changing operational methods or adjusting strategies, technologies, or even the strategies of an organization. Over the years, organizational development scholars develop a number of theories that actually attempt to describe factors that drive change in an organizational setting. And according to them, the two most influential theories are the dialectic model of change and the teleological model of change. So, in the next slide, you will see the two most influential theories. So, let's go first to the dialectic model of change. So, the dialectic model of change, organizational change, is driven by the inherent tension between current way of doing things and new ideas and values. So, meaning, in this theory, organizational change is actually happening in an organization between if there's an existing old ways and new ways in the company. So there's a lot of option that is under this theory. So the first option is they ignore or suppress the ideas, meaning they are not open to the changes, or they don't want to embrace it because they just want to stick to the current ways of doing the things in an organization, the old ways. The second option is they abandon the current ways or the current established ways of doing things in favor of the new ideas. So meaning they want to embrace the new ideas and totally neglect or abandon the old ways. The third option is actually they create a compromise or they create a synthesis, meaning a combination. It's more like an hybrid type. And the last option is the current status or the current ways of doing the things in an organization and the new ideas can actually coexist. Meaning it's much better because the old ways or the current established ways can actually work even or with the new ideas. So meaning there's a balance between the two. The next theory is the theological model of change. Organizational change is purposeful and goal driven. So, in this theory, actually, the main idea is a recognition that our current ways of doing things are actually not allowing change in an organizational setting. So, they are actually not into the old ways or the traditional ways because they want in order for them in order to achieve change there must be a change mismo dun sa companies or sa organization. So under this theory, we have what we call cognitive framing. So meaning, for change to occur, the organizational leaders need to change the way they view strategic issues and communicate these changes to offer in the organization. So the main idea is change is inhibited by the way how they frame issues and challenges facing an organization. It's how the top managers view issues. For example, an organization has traditionally viewed employee health and safety regulations as a burden. If we're going to apply the teleological model of change or the cognitive framing, ang mangyayari is instead of viewing it as a burden, they can just instead view it as a way of helping the employee and the organization to provide employees with a better quality of life. In addition to the theories, we actually have the Berkeley's theory of organizational change. So in this slide, this theory means that on assessing organizational and environmental factors which may be adapted to ensure a successful change, the most dominant factor that causes organizational change is often the external environment. So dito, pinapakita na yung pinaka-key factor ng pagkakaroon ng change sa isang organization ay external environment daw. So it proposes that the result of an organizational change is the result of interrelated factors. So in the next slide, makikita nyo dito yung Berger's theory of organizational change. Ito yung format niya. So, yung external environment, it has actually an impact in leadership, the mission strategy, and the organization culture. So, yung mission strategy, leadership, and even your organizational culture, these are the three key levers of change. So, etong tatlo daw na to is heavily impacted by the external environment. So in the model, you can see that the three key levers of change actually have a direct impact on the performance of the individual and organizational performance. Actually, this model proposed that those etong mga tong nasa box, meron siyang impact or effect sa bawat isa. Like, for example, yung leadership, kung nakaka-apekto yung external environment sa leadership, in the same way, leadership could also affect the external environment by shaping it. And the model clearly shows that the external environment plays a key role in an organizational change. So, in the next slides, I'm going to discuss the three key levers of change. So, in order for us to understand more, I'm going to discuss the three key levers of change. So, the three key levers of change can be used to sustain meaningful change over time in an organization. So, let's first define the mission and strategy. The purpose and the action to achieve the goals, it's a powerful catalyst for broader organizational change. So, mission and strategy, meaning it dictates what an organizational purpose is and how it plans to achieve its goals and purpose. It actually helps individual by providing them the purpose or a clear vision and mission that will drive organizational change. So next one is the leadership. It plays a key role in developing organizational mission and strategy as well as shaping the culture. So we all know that a leader or leadership is very important in an organization because they are the one who make contributions to the development of internal policies and procedures of an organization. And we have this saying that an organization are only as effective as the leader if they have the leader. And the last one is organizational culture. It represents the underlying values and basic assumptions that are present in the organization. So, organizational culture actually can have positive and negative effect in the individual performance and the entire organization. So, as we all know, organizational culture, this is the attitudes, the beliefs, the norms, and the values and how it affects the employee behavior in an organization. So, factors that drive organizational change. We have external and internal factors. So, in the next slide, we see the external factors and internal factors. When we say external factors, it influences the current operation growth and long-term sustainability, meaning yung nakapaligid or yung nasa labas, ayun yung mga nakaka-affect sa isang organization. And when we say internal factors, it means uh, it it's happening inside the organization mismo. So the first one is economic climate. So meaning it heavily affect the organization, especially if our economic is not stable. Like for example, inflation, recession. During those time, you have to lay off workers, and we know that in the Philippines there's a huge unemployment crisis that is happening. So when this problem exists, it actually affects the organization. So the next one is political. For example, there are some restrictions that the government implement or some ways that will actually affect the organization. For example, the minimum wage or let's say the government implements some restrictions or some policies that or rules to maintain the fairness in the business field. And next is the social. And actually, medyo same siya sa consumer demand and behavior because it talks about the consumer behavior, the trends, the lifestyle. It will actually affect the organization, especially the products. Kung ano yung product ng isang organization or services na ina-offer nila. Nakadepende siya or magkakaroon ng change on or impact if nagkaroon ng changes sa consumer behavior and demand and ayun sa lifestyle kasi 'di ba ngayon parang paiba-iba na ng lifestyle and madami ng trend. So dun tayo pupunta sa next sa competition. So this is very influential sa isang organization. Malaki yung impact nito kasi many competition or many competitor may arise and you have to really change your ways, your products, your services in order for you na makasabay dun sa mga bagong nilalabas ng mga competitor. So next is technology. So as time goes by, madami ng high-tech and advanced ang technology ngayon. So in order for your organization or your company to achieve a change, you should also adapt in the field of technology. Kasi ang technology ay malaki rin ang role sa isang organization. Like for example, for improvement of services, it is also used for manufacturing, contribution, and even yung mga online sites na pwedeng mas mapabilis or maging effective yung pag-operate ng isang organization.
Types of organizational structure. Organizational structure is a system that abstracts how certain activities are directed in order to achieve the goals of an organization. Organizational structure. It outlines the hierarchy within an organization. It also describes the roles and responsibilities along with the task allocations. Organizational structure helps companies to stay efficient and focused. First type is the bureaucratic structure. Under this, the pre-bureaucratic structure. It lacks the social controls over the task. This structure is the shortest organizational structure and is used to solve simple tasks such as sales. Pre-bureaucratic structure. Most conversations is done one by one, and the strategic leaders makes all the decision making. Next is bureaucratic structure. This structure defines the clear roles and responsibilities of every individual employee. It is a hierarchical structure with respect to merit. It has many levels, so decision-making authority has to pass through more layers than flatter. Bureaucratic structure is a formalized set of role expectations that specifies who expected to do what, how, and when. Example of bureaucratic structure is government agencies and military. Last is the post-bureaucratic structure. This type of structure has a long and strict hierarchy with a flexible post-bureaucratic structure. It is focused on how simple structures can be used to cause organizational adaptations. Second type is the hierarchical organizational structure. It is a pyramid-shaped chart where the board of directors is at the top position and workers at the bottom level. The advantage of hierarchical organizational structure, it gives every employee a specialty and creates a healthy working environment. The disadvantage is it can slow down innovation due to increased bureaucracy. Employees show interest in their own departments rather than the whole organizational structure. It consists of activities like task allocation, supervision, and coordination. Functional structure is also like a hierarchical structure. Here's the chart. Functional structure. A person with highest level of responsibility positioned at the top, and employees are positioned according to their skills and specialty. Each department is managed independently. The divisional organizational structure. It is one of the smartest organizational structure ever. In this structure, an organization is separated into some divisions, and each division has control over its own resources and operations. Divisional structure. It is designed for large companies. Employees are segmented into semi-autonomous units known as division. Example is the General Electric. It has division for electronics, transportation, and aviation, each with its own team of accountants and marketers. Under this, the geographic divisional organizational structure. Divisions are separated by districts, territories, and regions, offering more effective localization and logistics. Logistics companies and satellite offices are set up around the country in order to stay close and connected to the customers. Second type is the market-based divisional organizational structure. This division is separated by industry, market, and customer types. The market-based structure is ideal for an organization that has products or services that are incomparable to specific market segments. It keeps the business constantly conscious of demand changes among its different audience segments. Product-based divisional organizational structure. In a product-based divisional organizational structure, each division within the organization is dedicated to a particular product, suitable for organizations with multiple products and can help to shorten product development cycle. The advantage of divisional organizational structure is first advantage, it helps large companies to stay flexible, and it promotes autonomy and a customized approach. It also allows for a faster response to customer needs. Its disadvantage is duplicate resources can dominate easily and result in a company competing with itself. Next structure is the matrix. The matrix organizational structure groups employees by both function and product at the same time. This organizational chart looks like a grid, and it displays a cross-functional teams that form for specific projects. It doesn't follow the traditional hierarchical model. Employees have dual reporting relations to provide that flexibility and more balanced decision making. The advantage of matrix is it lets supervisors easily choose individuals through the needs of a project. It shows the more kinetic view of the organization, and it inspires employees to use their ability or skills in various capacities aside from their original roles. Disadvantages can create a conflict between project managers and departmental managers. It can also change more frequently than other organizational structures. Next is the flat or horizontal. It can fit companies with few levels between upper level management and lower level employees. Basically, startup businesses use this type of structure to grow. This structure is completely free of hierarchy-related pressure so that employees can be more productive. Organizational model with relatively few or no levels of middle management. between the executives and the frontline employees. Its goal is to have as little hierarchy as possible. Its advantage, it gives employees more responsibility and provides a better opportunity to grow. It also promotes more open communication and improves coordination. Its disadvantage, it can be difficult to maintain when the company grows beyond the startup state. The circular organizational structure. The appearance of circular organizational structure is different from the rest of organizational structure, but it still relies on the hierarchy, in which higher level employees occupying the inner rings of the circle while the lower level employees occupying outer rings. Leaders do not send orders down the chain of command, but rather outward. Leaders are not considered to sit at the top of the organization. Circular organizational structure advantage. It's meant to promote communication and free flow of information between different parts of the organization. Its disadvantage, unlike a hierarchical structure, a circular structure makes it difficult to find out whom to report and how they are meant to fit into the organization. Next is the team-based organizational structure. A team organizational structure is meant to disrupt the traditional hierarchy, giving employees more control, cooperation, and focusing more on problem solving. Team-based structure. It's made of teams working towards a common goal while working on their individual tasks. It is less hierarchical and have flexible structures that reinforce problem solving, decision making, and teamwork. Next is the network-based organizational structure. These structures contract out any business function that can be done better and more cheaply. Managers in these structures spend most of their time coordinating and controlling external relations. It makes sense of the spread of resources. Managers in an organization will coordinate relationships with internal and external entities to deliver their products or services. Example is the retail company. It will focus on selling clothes but will outsource the design and production of these items in partnership with other companies. Its advantage is it focuses more on open communication rather than hierarchy and allows companies to be more flexible. It gives all employees the power to collaborate and make decisions. Its disadvantage, it can become complex when dealing with an off-site process. It can be more difficult for employees to know whom to say. Lastly, line organizational structure. It is the authority flows from top to bottom. Unlike other structures, specialized and supportive services do not take place in these organizations. It is the chain of command and each department head has control over their departments. The advantage of line organizational structure is this approach can be beneficial to companies that are constantly growing and changing, and adapting quickly to changing conditions or situations. Its disadvantage is limiting specialization, becoming rigid and inflexible, and giving too much power to a manager.
Organizational change interventions. Organizational change interventions differ in terms of 1. The level in the organization at which they are aimed, and 2. The processes they are designed to impact. Organizational development interventions are typically aimed at individuals, groups, or the organization as a whole. Of this, the most popular level of intervention is groups, largely because most organizations have realized how important groups are to the success of organizations. Essentially, anything that can impact the performance of individuals or the organization as a whole could be the focus of an organization development intervention. So, there are 3 interventions: individual level interventions, group level intervention, and comprehensive organization-wide interventions. So, the first one is individual level interventions. In reviewing the history of organizational development, one of the first organizational development interventions was sensitivity training, also known as T group training. Although T group training is carried out in groups, it is an intervention aimed at the individual. This is because the primary goals of T group training are enhancement of interpersonal skills and competence, enhance awareness of the impact of one's behavior on others, and a greater general understanding of group dynamics. Although T group training was at one time the most popular intervention in organizational development, it is rarely used by organizational development practitioners today. Probably the major reason is that the effectiveness of T groups is doubtful. Although T groups are rarely used now as an organizational development intervention, the impact of it the impact of this intervention on the field of organizational development has been substantial. Many organizational development interventions that are popular today, for example, process consultation, team building, are historically rooted in the T group movement. Another common individual level intervention is job redesign. Job redesign can be a powerful individual level organizational development intervention because employees typically spend more time working on their job tasks than on any other activity in the workplace. Thus, job redesign can be a very powerful and efficient way to change the behavior of employees. The primary limitation of job redesign is that it does not typically address more macro issues in the work environment. Thus, even if jobs in an organization and successfully redesigned, this will not compensate for a culture of mistrust and hostility. Another commonly used organizational development intervention that is focused on individual employees is management by objectives, or MBO. Although the specifics of MBO programs vary widely among different organizations, certain features are common to most. Specifically, most involve some level of joint goal setting between employees and their supervisors. In addition, in most MBO programs, the performance of individual employees is assessed in relation to their progress in accomplishing these objectives. In general, empirical research has shown that MBO programs have a positive effect on employee performance, particularly when they are supported by top management. Next, group level interventions. As stated earlier, the most common level at which organizational development interventions are focused is the group or team. This is because more and more organizations are adopting team-based structures. It may also reflect the key role that T groups played in the history of organizational development. By far, the most common group level organizational development intervention is team building. According to Leibowitz and Demuth in 1982, team building is defined as a long-term database intervention in which intact work teams experientially learn by examining their structures, purposes, norms, values, and interpersonal dynamics to increase their skills for effective teamwork. It is a direct attempt to assist the group in becoming more adept at identifying, diagnosing, and solving its own problems. Usually, with the aid of a behavioral science consultation. A work group that successfully engages in a team building intervention is not necessarily going to be problem free. Team building interventions typically involve a series of 8 steps, including scouting, entry, data collection, data feedback, diagnosis, action planning, action implementation, and evaluation. The first step in the team building process is labeled scouting. Scouting is a preliminary step that involves an exchange of information between a consultant and a potential client organization. The consultant will typically describe his or her expertise, um, describe his or her expertise, values, and style of operation. The organization, in turn, would normally describe the nature of its problems as well as its views regarding the potential causes of these problems. If it is determined that team building is an appropriate intervention, the process would move ahead to the next step. If team building is inappropriate, on the other hand, the consulting relationship may be terminated unless the consultant can offer other needed services. Assuming that team building is appropriate, the process then moves onto the next step. Entry. This is the point at which the client-consultant relationship begins to be formalized. Although this is typically done through written contracts, there is considerable variation in the way consulting contracts are drawn up. Some consultants prefer contracts that are very specific about the nature of the work. The consultant very specific about the nature of the work the consultant will perform. Others prefer contracting to be more open-ended. However, regardless of how the actual contract is worded, what is important at this point is that consultant and the client organization forge a common understanding on the major dimensions of the consulting relationship. When the preliminary steps of scouting and entry have been completed, next, the consultant begins the process of data collection. This simply involves collecting information from a variety of sources on the current functioning of the work groups in an organization. This may also involve personal interviews of group members. Although consultants often obtain data from a variety of other sources, such as surveys, observations, and archival records. Surveys are probably the most common form of data collection, since there are many measures of team functioning available. Regardless of the data collection methods used, the major objective here is to get as complete a picture of the functioning of group as possible. Thus, the more methods and sources of information that can be used, the better. After data on group functioning are collected, the next steps are to summarize this data and then engage in some form of data feedback. This typically involves holding meetings with each of the groups in the client organization and presenting the data that have been collected. During data feedback, certain themes or areas of concern often surface. For example, group members may be dissatisfied with the level of communication or with the way decisions are made within the group. Unfortunately, data are simply numbers. Typically, they do not tell a group why a particular issue continues to surface. Thus, at this point, the group needs to engage in diagnosis, which represents the group's attempt to explain why the data came out the way they did. This is very crucial step in the team building process because for many groups, it may be the first time they have ever taken a serious look at their work methods and internal processes. Ultimately, during the diagnosis stage, groups identify things that are preventing them from performing up to their full capabilities. One could also think of this as barriers to performance. Developing a list of performance barriers is an important first step in the team building process because once these are identified, the group can begin to address them. This is the purpose of the next step. Action planning. During this phase, one or more action plans are developed for each of the important problems or performance barriers identified. For example, if one of the problems identified in the diagnosis stage is poor communication among group members, a corresponding action plan might be increase the number of group meetings from once a month to once every 2 weeks. Next, action implementation. This involves implementing the action plans that were agreed on during the team building meeting. This is the most challenging part of the team building process because even if the group's action plans are very good, they often require group members to give up old habits and engage in new behaviors. Next, the final stage in the team building process is evaluation, which normally takes place after some period of time has passed since the team building meeting. Evaluation involves the assessment of the group's progress on the implementation of the action plans. So this step is important because it makes the group accountable for implementing its action plans. So if there is no follow-up, groups will either fail to implement action plans or will begin to implement them but lose interest. Often, the evaluation portion of the process comes in the form of follow-up meeting in which the groups, with the assistance of a consultant, review progress on each of the action plans generated during the initial team building meeting. So the effectiveness of team building interventions has been supported by empirical research with positive impacts on team functioning, effective outcomes, and progress outcomes. A second organizational development intervention that is often aimed at the group level is process consultation. Process consultation is actually both a philosophy of consulting and an organizational development intervention. As a consulting philosophy, process consultation emphasizes that the role of a consultant is to guide an organization through the process of discovering what its problems are and help in finding solution to those problems. In doing so, the emphasis is on how things are done rather than what is actually done. Process consultation also represents a set of interventions that may be used by a consultant. Although these interventions are not exclusive to group settings, this is the context in which they are often used. Classified interventions on a continuum based on how confrontational they are vis-a-vis the client, vis-a-vis or face-to-face. So the least confrontational type of intervention that a consultant can use is an exploratory inquiry. For example, a process consultant may ask a group, "How have things have been? How have things been going to the past few months?" Or tell me a little bit about things that are important to the group's success. The second general type of intervention described by Shin is a diagnostic intervention. In this case, the process consultant does not tell the clients what to do, although the questions they may ask focused are more focused than in the exploratory inquiry stage. If a group decides that its primary problem is poor communication among group members, a diagnostic inquiry might be, "What do you think contributes to this poor communication within your group?" Or, "What can I do to help you improve communication?" So it is doubtful that members of such a group would perceive either of these questions as being confrontational. On the other hand, they do focus on a specific aspect of a group functioning, both in terms of isolating the problem and in determining whether the consultant will be able to help them solve it. The third level proposed by Shin is action alternative interventions. So, although this type of intervention does not involve telling the client what to do, it is potentially more more confrontational than the first two types of interventions, because the process consultation is asking the group, for example, "What have you done about the problem?" The final type of intervention described by Shin is labeled confrontive intervention. In interventions of this type, the process consultant makes recommendations as to how to solve the problem. For example, a process consultant may say, "Why don't you try this as a way to solve the problem?" Or, "I would recommend trying like that." So these statements are clearly more directive than the previous three. So they are also potentially more confrontational, because the client may assume that the way he or she had been doing things is incorrect. Many organizations see consultants as bright experts to whom they can essentially hand off their problems. Unfortunately, handing off problems is often counterproductive, because even extremely bright consultants rarely have enough information to immediately make concrete recommendations to an organization. Most problems in organizations are too complex and are embedded in a cultural context that an outside consultant cannot completely understand. A listing and categorization of process consulting interventions. So, to reiterate a point made earlier, these interventions were not specifically designed to be applied to groups, but they are often used to improve group functioning. Notice that many of these interventions are so simple and are used so frequently that we don't really think of them as being organizational development interventions. So, terms such as interested listening, forcing historical reconstruction, forcing concretization, forcing process emphasis, and diagnostic questions and probes are used all the time as a way to help people figure out what their problems are. Items 6 through 10 in the table are more specific to group settings and require a bit more explanation. With process management and agenda setting, the process consultant might provide suggestions as to group members I how group meetings should be conducted, or how the agenda might be structured. Although potentially confrontational, these interventions may also be very helpful. For example, providing feedback is also a potentially confrontational intervention, yet it may also be quite useful to a group. A process consultant sitting in a group meeting can observe many things about the group's functioning. Probably the most visible thing is the manner in which the group communicates. When a consultant makes content suggestions and recommendations, he or she is being even more directive and potentially confrontative. Potentially confrontive. Recommendations could also be made about the frequency of team meetings. A process consultant may suggest that a group that meets only once a month should start meeting twice a month. So this type of intervention is potentially confrontational because although the process consultant is not explicitly saying that things have been done wrong, the recommendations given to the work group may convey that opinion. With structure management, the process consultant may make recommendations regarding the design of a group's task, or perhaps the manner in which a group carries out its task. This is again potentially confrontational because the process consultants are directing the client to accept a solution to a problem that they rather than the client has proposed. So the final intervention listed in the table is labeled conceptual inputs. So it is common for process consultation to present relevant conceptual material during group-related interventions. So although conceptual inputs can certainly be useful, they can also be counterproductive, particularly if they are overused. So conceptual inputs may be confrontational if they highlight weaknesses in a group's processes. Given the generality of process consultation, there is little empirical evidence as to whether this approach is effective. It would seem, however, that there would be a number of advantages in using this method as opposed to more traditional forms of consultation. Comprehensive organization-wide interventions. Interventions that target and involve the organization as a whole are becoming increasingly popular for a number of reasons. For example, organizational change is most likely to occur and be sustained when the entire organization is involved in that change effort. Also, given the rapid rate of change in the business environment today, organizations often have to change quickly and therefore do not have the luxury of intervening with groups or individuals and then waiting for these interventions to facilitate organization-wide change. The most widely used organization-wide intervention is survey feedback. In a typical survey feedback program, a survey is administered to all employees. It may address issues such as attitudes, perceptions of organizational climate, perceptions of management, and perceived level of organizational effectiveness, among other things. After the survey is administered and returned, the results are tabulated and then presented back to employees, typically within their own work groups. Although survey development is important, the feedback process is the most crucial part of the process because this is what leads to organizational change. And thus, it is discussed in a bit more detail. In a model survey feedback program, the data are fed back to every employee in the organization in a trickle down procedure. That is, the top management team of an organization first reviews the survey results. Each member of the top management team then shares the data with his or her subordinates. This process is repeated until everyone in the organization has had an opportunity to review the data. The feedback process is what makes it an organization-wide intervention, and it distinguishes through survey feedback from many employee opinion surveys conducted in an organizational setting. Research has shown that survey feedback is an effective organizational change intervention. And in comparison to other OD interventions or organizational development or interventions, is one of the most effective. Research has research has also investigated more specific factors that impact the feedback process. Employees are more responsive to feedback when it comes from their managers and is perceived as relevant to their actual work groups. Because of this, in many survey feedback interventions, two types of data are presented back to employees. One, data that represent the opinions of the entire organization, and number two, data that represent the opinions of the department in which the work group may reside. So a second comprehensive organization wide intervention is changing the structure of an organization. The rationale behind structural change is quite simple. If all the departments in an organization are restructured, employees have no choice but to engage at least some form of change. Unfortunately, though, the changes that are brought about by structural changes may ultimate by only pseudo changes, unless a change in structure is accompanied by changes in employees' behavior. This is a relatively ineffective method of organizational change. Other common methods of facilitating broad-based organizational change are through large group methods for proactively creating the future. For proactively creating the future work design and for gaining whole-scale participation at work. An example of a method for proactively creating the future is Future Search. This is a 3-day conference which is designed to help representatives of a whole organizational system develop a vision of the future, as well as strategies to make the vision become a reality. So this general model can also be used to facilitate work design in the form of an intervention called participative design. This is very similar in format to Future Search, but the emphasis is on having employees participate democratically in the design, management, and control of their own work. Finally, an example of an intervention designed to facilitate whole-scale participation is open space technology. This intervention typically involves everyone in an organization, or in some cases, representatives of different functional areas. Here are the 5 discipline and their corresponding definitions. The process basically involves providing members of an organization an opportunity to discuss issues that are important to them and hear about issues that are important to other members of the organization. The basic idea is that such discussion will serve as an impetus for further discussions and ultimately change. Perhaps the most comprehensive method of changing an organization is known as the learning organization. So this intervention is based on the writings of best-selling author and management consultant Peter Seng, who wrote the 5th discipline. So, the basic idea of this intervention is that the primary driver of organizational change is learning. Thus, if organization increases its capacity for learning, it also increases its ability to adapt and change. So, he proposed that learning is facilitated during the 5 disciplines, which are contained in the table. And as you can see, and a number of interventions are aimed at accomplishing these disciplines. So, intuitively, his ideas make sense. Although there have been few efforts to subject them to methodologically rigorous evaluations. That will be all. Thank you.